The chamber was supposed to be quiet, routine, another day of politics played out under the sterile glow of the overhead lights. But then Susan Collins leaned forward, her voice cool, clipped, laced with the kind of condescension that can slice sharper than any shout. Frankly, she said, her words echoing in the stillness, I question your professionalism. For a split second, the room went still. It was the kind of silence that doesn't just hang in the air, it tightens it. Like everyone is holding their breath at once, heads turned. Pens froze mid-scribble. The insult didn't need to be screamed. It was delivered with the quiet certainty of someone who thought her authority was unshakable. Collins sat back, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth as if daring anyone to challenge her. Around the room, a low murmur began, rising like a ripple of electricity spreading from seat to seat. People exchanged glances. The word professionalism lingered heavy, charged with all the weight of coded dismissal. And at the center of it all sat Jasmine Crockett, unflinching, eyes locked forward. For a moment she didn't move, didn't even blink. The quiet stretched, a taut string ready to snap. Was this the end of the exchange or the beginning of something no one in that chamber was prepared for? Because what came next didn't just change the room, it sent shockwaves far beyond those walls and no one saw it coming. This wasn't just an insult tossed across the table, it was a collision of two worlds, one clinging to power through quiet condescension, the other rising to challenge it with unapologetic truth. Susan Collins, polished by decades in the Senate, had built her image on civility, on the appearance of moderation. But beneath the veneer was a habit too familiar in American politics, the dismissal of those who dared to disrupt the comfort of the establishment. Her questioning of Jasmine Crockett's professionalism wasn't simply about decorum, it was about hierarchy, about who is allowed to speak boldly and who is expected to sit quietly. Crockett represented everything Collins wasn't prepared for, young, unapologetic, unafraid. A civil rights attorney turned congresswoman, she carried the lived experience of communities too often talked about but rarely heard. For every immigrant family fighting for respect, every young activist demanding change, every voter exhausted by hypocrisy, Crockett's presence was proof that the old rules were cracking. That made her a threat, and Collins knew it. In that chamber, the air wasn't just heavy with insult, it was thick with history, the weight of generations told to wait their turn, the clash between those defending a fading order and those demanding a future built on dignity. Collins framed her jab as a question of standards, but to millions watching it was a question of identity. Who gets to define professional? Who gets to decide what voices count? The stakes weren't merely personal, they were national, and the answer to Collins's sneer wouldn't just protect Crockett's name, it would challenge the very power dynamics that defined Washington. Because Crockett wasn't about to give a timid defense. She was about to deliver something else entirely, something that would flip the weight of Collins's words back onto her shoulders. And when she did, the chamber would never sound the same again. For years, Susan Collins has worn the mask of moderation. To the casual observer, she is the senator who pauses thoughtfully before a vote, who speaks with measured tones about civility and bipartisanship. The press has often called her a swing vote, a voice of reason, but beneath that polished exterior lies a trail of decisions that cut deep into the very fabric of progress she claims to weigh so carefully. When the stakes are highest, Collins has a habit of stepping forward just long enough to appear conflicted, then retreating into the safety of party lines. She has spoken of women's rights while voting to confirm judges hostile to them. She has promised accountability while shielding those in power from consequence. To many, she embodies the very contradiction of Washington, a public image of balance masking a record of quiet betrayal. And her manner in debate only sharpens the sting. Collins doesn't rage, doesn't thunder. Instead, she leans back in her chair, lips pursed, as though she alone holds the keys to grown-up politics. When challenged, she smirks, delivers her dismissals in a voice dripping with superiority, as if every opponent is a reckless child in need of correction. To her, professionalism is not about principle, it's about obedience to her version of decorum. That's what made her jab at Jasmine Crockett sting so much. It wasn't just one senator critiquing another, it was a practiced pattern of condescension aimed squarely at someone who refused to play by her rules. She believed the room was hers, that silence and restraint would protect her authority, but arrogance has a way of clouding judgment. And in that moment, Collins didn't see the storm building across from her. She didn't recognize that her smirk, her carefully sharpened dismissal was about to meet its match, and more than a match, because Jasmine Crockett wasn't about to sit quietly. She was about to show Collins that the old language of superiority had finally met a voice powerful enough to shatter it, and when it landed, the echo wouldn't just shake Collins, it would reverberate across the nation. Before she ever stepped into Congress, Jasmine Crockett was already battle-tested. She didn't come from political royalty or wealth. She came from the courtroom where she stood shoulder to shoulder with those who could not afford the privilege of power. As a civil rights attorney, she represented people whose voices were silenced, whose dignity was dismissed, and whose futures were at the mercy of systems tilted against them. In those cramped courtrooms, facing judges who often looked past her and opponents who underestimated her, she learned to fight with both precision and fire. Crockett carried those lessons into politics, but the transition was anything but smooth. As a black woman, she entered a world that scrutinized her every word, every gesture, every choice of clothing. The very traits celebrated in her male colleagues, boldness, confidence, refusal to back down, were recast as abrasiveness when she displayed them. She was told in subtle ways and in blunt ones that she was too loud, too direct, too unapologetic. Yet she refused to shrink herself to fit into someone else's definition of acceptable. Every campaign stop, every debate, every long night away from family came at a cost. But Crockett made those sacrifices willingly because she understood what representation meant. She knew that her very presence in those halls of power sent a message to young women, to immigrant families, to anyone who had ever been told to sit down and wait their turn. Your voice matters and it deserves to be heard at full volume. And she didn't just carry her own story. She carried the weight of generations of ancestors who fought to vote, of parents who worked double shifts, of communities who rallied around hope even when the system was rigged against them. That fire in her speeches, that steel in her stare, it wasn't anger for its own sake. It was the fuel of lived experience, sharpened into conviction. So when Susan Collins tried to question her professionalism, it wasn't simply an insult. It was a challenge to everything Crockett had built her life around. She had spent years standing firm in rooms where no one expected her to win. This chamber, this moment was no different. This was the moment all her battles prepared her for, and when she answered, it would not just defend her, it would ignite something far larger. Collins wasn't finished. Having tossed out the word professionalism like a stone into still water, she let the ripples spread and then added more weight. She adjusted her glasses, her tone icy, the cadence slow, deliberate, as though she were delivering a lecture to a student rather than addressing a colleague. This chamber, she said, demands a level of restraint. Perhaps some of us would do well to remember that. Gasps rustled through the room, soft but audible. Crockett sat motionless, her posture firm, her hands folded calmly before her. Collins mistook the stillness for hesitation, for weakness, and pressed harder. Decorum, she continued, isn't optional. It's the foundation of how we conduct ourselves. Without it, we are nothing more than chaos. The irony didn't escape those watching. Collins, cloaked in the language of order, was using it to undermine, to reduce, to diminish. Her words dripped with the practiced disdain of someone who believed longevity equaled authority. Each sentence was a pat on the head disguised as principle. Around the chamber you could see the tension building, a sigh from one side, a raised eyebrow from another. A few whispered comments rippled between aides and staffers, their pens scribbling faster now, as if recording a moment they knew could not be ignored. Even the cameras seemed to lean closer, waiting for the inevitable response. But Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't roll her eyes, didn't rush to interrupt. She sat in the growing storm, her silence louder than Collins's dismissals. It was the patience of someone who had been underestimated too many times to count, someone who knew that the most powerful counterpunch is the one delivered when your opponent least expects it. Collins mistook that patience for surrender. Her voice grew sharper, tinged with irritation. And frankly, she added, if certain members cannot rise to that standard, then perhaps they should reconsider how they serve this body. That was the breaking point. The room shifted. A sharp murmur cut across the silence. An audible signal that Collins had crossed from critique into insult. Every eye swung back to Crockett, waiting, wondering. Would she absorb the blow, let the dismissal hang unanswered, or would she do what so many silently hoped, fire back with the clarity and force only she could deliver? Then Crockett leaned forward, and the atmosphere shifted. Crockett didn't rush. She let the silence swell until even the shuffling of papers sounded like thunder. Her gaze was steady, locked on Collins, unshaken, and then, in a voice that cut through the chamber with calm precision, she began. Professionalism, she repeated slowly, almost as if tasting the word. She let it hang in the air, let it echo back toward the one who had wielded it like a weapon. A murmur flickered through the room, the first spark of recognition that this was not going to be a meek reply. You question my professionalism, she continued, her tone sharp but controlled. Senator, I spent my career defending those who had no one to defend them. I've walked into courtrooms where the deck was stacked against my clients before the first word was spoken, and every time I conducted myself with integrity, with service, with the dignity my community deserves. That's professionalism. She paused, the silence deliberate. Eyes darted across the chamber, waiting for Collins's reaction. The senator shifted uncomfortably, her smirk beginning to falter. But let's be clear, Crockett pressed on. Professionalism is not about speaking softly so others feel comfortable. It is not about bowing our heads when injustice stares us in the face. Professionalism, she said, leaning slightly forward now, is having the courage to stand firm, even when people in power would rather silence you. Gasps rippled across the room. Staffers froze, pens midair. A few audible mms came from the gallery, impossible to suppress. Crockett's voice sharpened. If questioning hypocrisy, if refusing to nod along while people's rights are stripped away, if showing up every single day for the people who sent me here, if that makes me unprofessional, then so be it. I would rather be called unprofessional than be remembered for standing silent. Collins's composure cracked. She adjusted her notes, glanced around the room, but the aura of control she wore so easily was slipping. The chamber could feel it, the balance of power shifting in real time. Crockett sealed the moment with a final blow. Because professionalism isn't about protecting the powerful, it's about protecting the people. And if that makes you uncomfortable, Senator, perhaps it says more about your definition of professionalism than mine. The room erupted, not with cheers, not with applause, but with the unmistakable electricity of a truth landing squarely where it was meant to. Gasps, whispers, the hurried tapping of phones as staffers and reporters raced to capture the quote. On social media, hashtags were already beginning to form: #professional with purpose, #Crockett, Clapback, #dignity over dismissal. Collins sat stiff, lips pressed thin, her face betraying the rare look of someone unaccustomed to being disarmed. For once she had no retort. Crockett, meanwhile, leaned back in her chair, calm, unbothered, the faintest trace of a knowing smile tugging at the edge of her lips. She had said what needed to be said, and in doing so she had turned Collins' weapon into her own undoing. But outside those walls the impact was only beginning to ripple, because what had just happened in that chamber was about to explode far beyond it, reaching timelines, news feeds, and living rooms across the nation. The clip spread like wildfire. Within minutes, phones buzzed across the country as the exchange rocketed onto social media. The word professionalism was no longer Collins's weapon, it was Crockett's banner. Hashtags trended instantly. #Crockett Clapback, #professional with purpose, #dignity over dismissal. Memes poured in, splicing Collins's frozen expression with captions that cut sharper than any headline. TikToks remixed the moment into sound bites of defiance, looping Crockett's final line, "Professionalism isn't about protecting the powerful," into an anthem. On Twitter, voices that rarely agreed found common ground. Activists, celebrities, even late-night comedians weighed in. Finally, one post read, "Someone stood up to the smug dismissal we've all had to swallow." Another declared, "Jasmine Crockett just redefined professionalism for a generation." The validation was everywhere, a digital standing ovation echoing long after the chamber had emptied. Cable news seized the moment. Anchors replayed the exchange on loop, some marveling at Crockett's composure, others noting Collins's silence. Panels dissected the body language, the pauses, the symbolism of a younger black congresswoman refusing to bow to an entrenched senator's condescension. The contrast was irresistible. The old guard rattled, the new voice unshaken. Crowds outside political circles felt it too. In coffee shops, offices, and classrooms, people replayed the clip, nodding along, feeling as though Crockett had spoken not just for herself but for anyone who had ever been talked down to, dismissed, or told to know their place. The refrain was nearly universal. She said what we've all wanted to say. The shockwaves were undeniable. A single clapback had transcended politics and become a cultural moment, a line in the sand between silence and defiance. But even as the internet reveled and commentators filled hours of airtime, something deeper was stirring. Because the ripple effects weren't confined to Twitter, they reached the halls of power. In the quiet that followed the storm, the meaning of that moment began to crystallize. Crockett's words were more than a rebuttal. They were a lesson in what true professionalism looks like. It isn't measured by deference to those in power or by carefully choosing which opinions to challenge. True professionalism, she showed, is rooted in integrity, in speaking truth to authority, and in defending the dignity of every person, no matter how uncomfortable it makes the powerful feel. Her message resonated far beyond the walls of the chamber. Courage, justice, and equality are not abstract ideals. They are lived principles enacted when someone refuses to be silent, when they insist that fairness matters more than comfort, that truth matters more than legacy. In standing firm, Crockett reminded a nation that these values are not just aspirational, they are actionable, even in the face of arrogance and intimidation. This exchange was a microcosm of a larger American story, the struggle between the old guard, accustomed to quiet obedience, and new voices, determined to demand respect and accountability. It was a reminder that progress depends on those who refuse to bow, on those who step into spaces where silence has long been expected and speak anyway. Every young woman, every immigrant, every community historically told their voices didn't matter, could see themselves reflected in Crockett's composure and fire. And yet the moment carried more than personal triumph, it carried symbolic weight. It signaled that authority is not unassailable, that arrogance can be challenged without chaos, and that justice need not be polite to be right. In a world where civility is often weaponized to silence dissent, Crockett reframed it as courage, showing that dignity and determination can redefine what it means to act professionally. And that's why this moment wasn't just a clapback, it was a cultural shift. It reminded the nation that integrity outlasts arrogance, that voices long marginalized can not only speak but command attention, and that courage, when wielded with precision and heart, can change the story entirely. It wasn't just a victory for one Congresswoman. It was a reminder that standing tall for what's right can ripple outward, reshaping the world for everyone who dares to follow. When Susan Collins questioned Jasmine Crockett's professionalism, she didn't just get an answer, she got a masterclass. In that chamber, in front of cameras and colleagues, Crockett demonstrated what it means to stand firm without losing grace, to speak truth without compromise, and to turn a personal attack into a lesson for an entire nation. It was a moment that reminded everyone watching that courage and dignity are not abstract ideals, they are actions that ripple outward, inspiring others to claim their voice and refuse to be silenced. And that's where you come in. This isn't just a story to watch and forget, it's a call to recognize the power in standing up for what's right, to celebrate voices that challenge the old guard, and to honor those who fight for justice and equality in every space they occupy. Share this video, discuss it with your friends, and let it spark conversation in your own community. Subscribe for more moments that don't just report the news but show the people shaping it with courage, integrity, and fire. Be part of the movement where dignity defeats arrogance, where truth is louder than silence, and where one voice refusing to bow can ignite a tide of change. Because sometimes one voice in one room can shake an entire nation.